Hi, thank you so much for stopping by my channel. My name is Lori Dickman. This is Quilting with Lori. And today I want to share with you how you can cut scraps that are on the bias and get them on grain. I've had a number of people that have asked me about that. Many of you have watched my Speedy Solutions to Cut and Organize Your Scrap Stash video. And I really have enjoyed your comments, and I'm so thankful that you're all watching it and enjoying that and making use of that video. And today I just want to share with you how you can cut your squares so that they are truly on grain when you have a scrap that's on the bias or a very odd shaped scrap. So let's get started. So as you can see here, I've got some pretty wonky looking scraps. Unbelievably strange, and they're definitely on the bias. And I'm going to show you how I would cut these up and put them in my scrap stash. If you're a garment sewer, you probably remember how to pull a thread to identify the straight of grain. And so I've grabbed a thread right here, a loose thread on the edge, and I'm pulling on that, and you'll notice that it's probably going to be more visible on the back. Maybe this fabric is too light to see that. But there is a thread that's becoming very evident in that lengthwise or crosswise. And so what you could do to get this particular piece of fabric on grain is to line up your ruler right on that thread that you can see that's been pulled in there. Now here, hopefully in this light, you're able to see that dark little line there. That shows exactly where that thread, it's the crosswise thread, across the width of the fabric that I had pulled. And I can actually take my ruler and line up my ruler on that thread to make my first cut. And then as long as I'm using this straight edge right here to cut the rest of my squares, it will definitely be on grain. So in this case, I'm going to definitely cut off that selvage. You never want to include selvage in your scraps or in any part of your quilt. And then what I'm going to do, it looks like it's going to cut into a 3-inch square. So I'm going to line up the ruler up here. It's perfectly even here. Cut there. So what I'm able to get from this side is a 3-inch square, and it is definitely on grain. And these are just the leftover pieces. So there's a 3-inch square that's on grain that I was able to cut from that very bias scrap. Here it is again. Let's say you don't want to pull a thread. You can study the piece of fabric, just really study it well, and identify where the crosswise and the lengthwise threads are. And then just lay your ruler as close as possible on a lengthwise or crosswise thread. And that's what I'm doing right here. I'm able to see it. You're probably not going to be able to see it on the camera there. But I've got that lined up so I can cut that away. And now we've got this on grain. So now let's get rid of the selvage again. We don't want that in our scraps. And again, I'm not going to be able to cut a very large square because this is not going to allow me to cut a very large one. I'd like to be able to get a 3.5. You know what? I can actually get a 3.5. I'm making sure that this is on the straight grain here, 3.5. That's 3.5, and I will be able to obtain a 3.5-inch square right there. So that's left over. So I have a 3.5-inch square. Now, what can I do here? I have 2 edges that are on grain. And so let's see if I can get a 2.5. I can. So I have this on the 2.5-inch line. And so I can, cut that. So we've got a 2.5, 3.5, and a 2.5. And I believe this is going to be too small. I might have gone to a 1.5, but the corner would be cut off. I don't cut any scraps that are less than 1.5 inches. So all of this would go in my pet pillow, and it would be stuffing for my pet pillow. Now let's take a look at this piece of fabric here. it is definitely, there's bias everywhere. So it's definitely on bias. But there is this one edge that has kind of a ruffled edge here, and I can pull the thread and get it on grain. So this particular edge right here actually is the straight edge right over here. So I could trim that up and use that as my straight edge, and then from that point on I can cut squares. What I would do with this one, and it's going to be harder for you to see it because it's green on a green mat, but I am going to line that up on the thread that I had pulled, cut away all this fuzzy stuff, we don't need that, and now I can use that. It's kind of hard for you to see it, so I'm going to use this right here as my straight of grain, and I'm going to be able to cut in my Speedy Solutions techniques. I always like to cut the largest square possible each time I cut from a piece of scrap. So let's see what I can do here. I could actually cut, I can't quite get a 6 by 6, but I can get a 5 by 5. So I am going to cut a 5 by 5. So I'm lining up the line down at the bottom here with the 5-inch, and this is my straight of grain, so this is the most important edge here that I need to follow. And then I'm going to cut here, and I'm going to cut here. Oops. And then I don't have this on a rotating mat, so I've got to rotate this. And then I'm making sure that my straight of grain here is lined up, and this 5-inch line is right here, and this is lined up properly. And here we go. So now I have a 5-inch square from that crazy piece of fabric that you had just seen. And I'll still be able to get additional pieces from this. I'll be able to use these two lines now. They're on grain. Let's see what size. I can't get a 2 by 2. Well, I guess I can just, there's a thread or two that's missing from that corner, but it's going to work. So there's a 2-inch square. These would be scraps. They would go on my pet pillow. And this is the straight of grain right here. So that's the edge that I need to follow to obtain squares from this. And let's see, can I do a 3 by 3? No, I really can't. So I need to go down to a 2.5 by 2.5, and I'm coming over as close as I can to this edge. There's a 2.5, and then I'll flip that scrap around, line up my 2.5 there, 2.5 there. That's my straight of grain over there. And here we go. So there's a 2.5. So I have a 5, a 2, and a 2.5 from that scrap. And let's see what we can get from here. This looks like I can get a 2 by 2 here. Yes. So there's the straight of grain on 2-inch, straight of grain on the 2-inch line. And we will cut that away. So from that very wonky piece of fabric, we got a 5-inch, a 2.5-inch, and a couple of 2-inch squares. And in fact, I think we can probably get more. This is the straight of grain. I might be able to get a 1.5-inch square from this. I do use 1.5-inch squares for snowballing in my quilt pieces and quilt blocks. So that might be something that you'll want to consider. So I do have a lot of 1.5-inch. I do like to make 9 patches out of them and use them for snowballing. So there is a 1.5-inch square. So these would all go into my scrap stash. So if you run across a scrap in your stash that is so biased, or you're just having a really hard time trying to determine if it's on the true straight of grain with a lengthwise or a crosswise thread, then what I would do with that particular scrap is simply cut small squares from it. What I typically do with that kind of thing is just cut 1.5-inch squares. I do not cut larger squares out of that then. I always make sure if the scrap can be trued up, so that it's on the straight of grain with lengthwise or crosswise threads, then you can go ahead and cut larger squares. But if not, just be safe and cut the smaller squares. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for stopping by my channel. My name is Lori Dickman. It's quiltingwithlori.com. Please like and subscribe. I'd love to see you again for additional videos that I'm putting out. Thanks so much and have a great day.